Hi, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to our Transition to Work Day 1 Symposium. My name is Nafisa Kadir, and I'm the Manager for Advising Services at Humber College. I've been part of the Humber community for over 15 years, 4 of those as a student at the Lakeshore campus, and 3 as a professional staff at the University of Guelph Humber. I'll leave the rest to the math folks. It is a privilege to share space today with Keith as one of your transition to work moderators. One of our many roles today includes fostering a positive environment for meaningful interaction among our guest speaker, partners, colleagues, and learners. Before I pass it over to my colleague Keith for his introduction and remarks, I would like to express my immense gratitude to CIBC for their generous contribution to our Transition to Work initiative. Their support has played a critical role in not only enabling our programming, but allowing it to flourish. TTW, our Transition to Work initiative, like this week's symposium, provide valuable insights and resources to help students with disabilities prepare for their entrance into the workplace. I joined the advising team back in October of 2023, and I've had the opportunity to attend my first 2 TTW events the following month. In this short period, I've had the privilege for not only connecting with students, but also connecting with students who are not only shaping the future, but also pose a significant contribution to the realm of education and beyond. Thank you again to our CIBC partners. I'll pass it along to Keith.
Thank you, Nafisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Keith Manalo. I'm an Accessible Learning Coordinator down at Humber's Lakeshore campus. I'm so glad everyone can join us today. I hope you get a few bits of key information that you find helpful. We also have a few folks in the background who are supporting us from the career and advising team. We have Jennifer, who will be supporting the chat, as well as Gabriella, who will be supporting the Q&A function. I also want to say hello to everyone online and our folks who are on campus right now at the Barrett Center who are attending the watch party. Hello, thank you for joining us. With that said, let's get started because I know we're just a little bit behind, but we'll catch up in due time. And so we'll get started. We'll get started with the land acknowledgement.
Thank you for sharing this video with our learners, Keith. As an immigrant and woman of color in Canada, acknowledging the Indigenous land is a reminder of the rich history that predates my own arrival to Canada from a once colonized British South American country named Guyana. Guyana has an Indigenous meaning, and it means the land of many waters. Recognizing these lands prompts my own reflection on the importance of fostering a sense of connection to both my home and my new home and the Indigenous communities that surround us. The importance of embracing diversity and understanding our own multiple identities and our colleagues. I would like to take this opportunity to encourage you on your own journey of reflection and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafisa, for sharing that reflection. And so we do want to highlight that we have ASL interpreters available to support us throughout this event. The ASL interpreters are Ryan and Melissa. You may currently see Ryan right now, who is spotlit in the platform. So each speaker, Nafisa and myself, as well as our keynote speaker, Tim Rose, will be spotlit throughout the event. And so if you do require ASL interpretation, it's best to look out for both Ryan and Melissa in the video grid. Auto captioning is also available through MS Teams. So to turn on auto captioning, look for the More option in the upper menu bar. It's indicated by 3 dots. Once you select the More option, a drop-down will appear where you can select language and speech, and then select Turn on Live Captions. And this should enable the auto captioning feature on MS Teams.
Thank you, Keith, for those amazing reminders. For engagement guidelines, please know that you can comment using the chat box. I've seen some interaction pop up on my screen already. If you would love to ask any questions, we encourage you to do so, and we'll take those questions up at the break. The other piece is just a kind reminder, and I know you guys will do an amazing job at this, is to engage with effect and rather than intention. So I want you to think about, the impact of your words and the context that we lose when we're online. So the loss of tone and how that may come across to, our presenters, moderators, and your colleagues with us today. So even if you did not mean to be rude or dismissive, it may be perceived this way. So just a kind reminder for everyone. And we'll move along to the engagement or the agenda slide. Okay, so some of this, of course, we've covered already. Now, there is a scheduled break, but what I would say to everyone, when you need a break, do take it. It is important that you get around if you can do so and move around, and also step away from the screen if that is what serves you the best at that point. A reminder, we do have a prize announcement that will follow the break, our Q&A, and then our wrap-up where we'll share some resources with you.
Thank you, Nafisa, for going through the agenda. So we're just going to do a quick 1-minute guided meditation. I find that meditations are a great way for us to focus. And it's a great way to prepare ourselves for a session of listening, learning, and engaging. So if everyone can just follow along, there will be captions in the video to guide us. Okay, and that's it. That's it for the guided meditation. It's just a really quick way to settle in for today's event. We're just gonna proceed to our keynote speaker, Tim Rose. And Nafisa will do a little bit of an introduction.
Thank you, Keith. And I feel like I'm ready to go. Thank you for the meditation. And I hope those of you joining us feel the very same. It is my very much pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Tim Rose. Tim Rose is a business leader, writer, and activist who was lucky enough to be born with cerebral palsy spastic quadriplegia. Raised to push the envelope, Tim has had the privilege of living, studying, and working on 3 continents and has experienced accessibility through the lens of many different cultures. A proud team member of CIBC since 2017, I think, Tim, we're in competition of how many years we've been where we've been. Tim has held a variety of roles within the bank, including compliance and community investment. He is currently the messenger manager on the client experience team, helping to ensure that banking as a whole become more accessible to client and team members with disabilities. Tim, again, a very warm welcome to you. I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you so much, Nafisa, and thank you, everyone. Can I just get a thumbs up from someone that you can hear me? Are we good?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'd like to start my presentation by just talking a little bit about who I am. And I always start these presentations by talking about my disability. So as Nafisa said in my intro, I was lucky enough to be born with cerebral palsy spastic quadriplegia. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to spell that. Basically what that means is that I was born with limited use of my hands. So I have the use of 2 fingers on my left hand. Here you go, these 2. And full vocal range. Other than that, I use a power wheelchair and have for my entire life. And I require assistance with everything from bathing to eating to going to bed. Most people, when they see my level of disability, would assume that it is a negative in my life, or that it at least makes my life more challenging. And what they don't realize is that when you have a disability, you actually have a superpower. Because you get to see the world through a lens that very few people get to see the world through. And that is a really, really powerful thing. So I want to talk today about how I realized that, because I didn't always feel this way. But there's been some key moments in my career where I have recognized and realized that my disability is a huge asset. And it is, in fact, I can say confidently now, the #1 asset that I bring to work with me at CIBC every single day. And I'll get into that story in a little bit. We will have time for questions at the end. So please, if you have a question for me, and you can ask me anything, and I mean anything, please note it down, and we'll get through as many questions as we can, obviously time permitting at the end. And if I could ask one of our moderators to just keep me honest on time, if you could give me like a 5-minute wrap up, Tim, warning, that would be great. So I want to start my presentation by talking a little bit about how I grew up. And as it was said in my bio, I've had the privilege of growing up on 3 different continents. I grew up in Canada initially, and then when I was 11, my family moved to the Middle East. Then I came home to Canada, and after university, I ended up going to England to do my master's degree. But I want to start by talking about 2 people. And those 2 people are my parents. And yes, they know that I always involve them in this presentation, or when I do these types of presentations, because I want to talk a little bit about disability positive parenting. And you might be wondering what that is. So my parents were advocates, and they realized when I was born that they were going to need to support with my level of disability, they were going to need to support my interactions, my engagement with society, but they were also parents who did not ever let me use my disability as a crutch or as an excuse or as anything to get out of doing chores. I had chores just like my two older brothers had chores. I got yelled at when I didn't do my homework. I got beat up by my two older brothers, and yes, they are also aware that I say this every time I talk about them. But what that did for me was it made me realize that my disability was never going to be an excuse in my life. And they were never going to overprotect me. Like all parents, they protected me just as much as they protected my two older brothers. But they never let my disability make me feel different or other. And that was a really important thing for me. And then I grew up, and like all teenagers, I started to explore who I was as a person and what I wanted out of life. And I realized pretty early on that one of my passions was also disability advocacy, just like my mom. My mom had in my youth become one of Ontario's leading parent advocates. She was executive director of an organization that focused on parents of children with disabilities. And I realized pretty early on, I would say at around the age of 16, 17, that I wanted to follow in my mother's footsteps as an advocate. But I didn't really know at the time what that actually meant. I knew that I wanted to make the world better for people with disabilities. But that's all I knew. And I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. I just knew that I had the passion for it. So in university, I got very involved in student government. And to anyone listening today that's thinking about getting involved in student government, either at Humber or Guelph Humber or Seneca, I highly encourage connecting with your student community and getting involved if you want to get involved. If you don't, that's cool too. And I had a lot of friends who didn't get involved in that stuff, but that wasn't me. So in university, I got very involved and was very connected to the disability community. And then I did my master's degree in England. And when I came home to Canada, I was quite sure that I was going to roll into a job. I almost said walk into a job, but I've never walked anywhere. So I was quite sure that I was going to roll into a job immediately. I had a master's of law in human rights from a global top 30 university. I'd succeeded at everything I was doing. As my bio had mentioned, I'd experienced disability on many different cultures, and so I had that in my back pocket. And I was quite sure that I was going to roll into a job, no problem. And guess what? That didn't happen. For many years, I struggled to find a career. So much so that I actually went into a pretty deep depression for a long time. And to anyone on the call that has experienced any kind of depression or sadness, and I think on some level we all have, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, I want you to know that that's okay. and it doesn't make you weak. In fact, I am living proof that it makes you a lot stronger. And if I hadn't gone through that experience of struggling to find a career and struggling to get in anywhere and struggling to let people know that I had skills and I had something of value to bring to the workforce, I would not be the man I am today if I hadn't had that experience. So don't be scared of career struggles because they can happen to anyone. And then I had a moment when I was kind of at the darkest, deepest point of this career struggle. I had a moment where I said, wait a second. I know that my disability is a huge asset. I've known that for a long time. It gives me a lens on the world that very few people get to have. But also, it gives me a lot of practical skills. And I'll talk about a couple of them right now, because these are advantages that I directly attribute to my disability. The first one is because as a kid, when it was time for class projects, I could not be the one doing the physical work, gluing things together or anything like that. I was always the one in group projects that was nominated to be the speaker or the narrator or whatever vocal role there was on the team. And because of that, I became a very comfortable, confident public speaker. And that is directly related to my disability. Another really quick example of skills that are directly related to my disability would be my mental math skills. Because if you think about it, in math class growing up, I could never write anything down. And so I had to learn to do math in my head. And you might think, Tim, that is a pretty weak example you just gave. But if you think about it, I work at a bank. So I'm dealing with numbers all the time. And my ability to process numbers quickly, even if it's not kind of conventional math, is a skill that is directly because of my disability. So with those two examples and a lot of other examples that I won't go into, I knew that my disability was an advantage. So I said to myself, how am I going to show the rest of the world that my disability is an advantage? And I did that by setting up my own consulting business called Disability Positive Consulting. And I want to spend a minute and talk a little bit about what I mean by disability positive. Disability positive is kind of an evolution of how disability is perceived. So when I was growing up, disability was very much a medical problem. And then we got to what is called the social model of disability, which is an academic model that says you're not disabled by cerebral palsy in my case. You are disabled by the barriers that society puts in front of you. So it's not my disability, it's society's refusal to accommodate my disability. And that is a valuable and important perspective. But I wanted to take it a bit further. And I believe that my disability is not only not a result of my medical diagnosis, if you want to call it that, but my disability is actually an advantage. And all those barriers that I just mentioned, that society puts in front of me, are actually opportunities. There are opportunities to push the envelope. There are opportunities to trailblaze. There are opportunities to let people see the world in a different way. And I have a lot of friends who are quote unquote able-bodied, who tell me that they didn't realize how many stairs there are in the world or how many curbs there are in the world until we started hanging out together. And being able to give people that opportunity to see barriers for themselves is incredibly powerful. And once I did that, so once I set up my consulting business, my career took off in a pretty big way. And I worked for a long time in the disability employment space, which is why I'm so happy to be speaking to all of you today. But I also worked in the nonprofit sector. I started my own charity with my ex-wife. And really, I started to, as soon as I put my disability out there as a positive, that's when things started to change for me. And that's when those career struggles turned into career accelerations. So then, oh, and we'll just give the interpreters a second to switch. So then I went into the disability employment space, and I ended up working at what is now Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson University. I went and did a lot of work in the disability employment space. And it was through that work that I got connected with CIBC. Now, I am shamelessly, left wing. So the fact that I work at a bank is as surprising to me as it is to everyone else. And if you had told 18-year-old Tim that you would feel more like a change maker and a trailblazer working in the corporate world than you would starting your own charity and working in the nonprofit sector, I would have thought you were, there's no way. But I had an opportunity through my work at Magnet at Toronto Metropolitan University to get connected with CIBC because they were a funder of one of our programs. And the executive that was sponsoring diversity at that time is an amazing woman who is now one of my mentors. And we were in a meeting, I was at Magnet, and she came up to me after the meeting and said, "What would it take for you to come to this side of the table?" And I believe my exact words were, "Not much," but I had no idea if I could work in a bank at all. And so I ended up having a couple more meetings with her, and she set up meetings for me with some of her executive team. And I have now been at CIBC, proudly at CIBC, since 2017. And I will tell you that I do feel more like a change maker than I ever did working in the nonprofit sector, working for corporate Canada, within corporate Canada. And my friends will often joke that I'm trying to bring them down from the inside. And I'm not really. But that doesn't mean there are things that I don't want to change. And I'm so glad to have the opportunity to help banks get better at serving people with disabilities. And so the role that I'm in now on our client experience team at CIBC allows me to say, how can we remove barriers for clients with disabilities, for team members with disabilities, who can make banking easier? How can we make banking easier for them? And that is a really exciting opportunity. And I will share with all of you that my disability and the skills that I talked about earlier, but also the perspective that my disability gives me, is the #1 reason that I'm successful at my job. But it's also the #1 reason that I am the person that I am today. And so I want you to think about, as you're in this symposium, I want you to think about, what are my advantages that people might not think of as advantages? And how can I use them? How can I tap into them to accelerate my own career journey? And that's why I named this talk Preparing to Trailblaze, because all of us are trailblazers. All of us can push the envelope and can make a difference and can change the way that we think about diversity in our society. We all have that power. And I hope that by hearing my story and the struggles that I went through and the challenges that I went through, that you can all realize that it's okay to go through challenges. In fact, it made me a better person. But now that I'm here, I'm so glad to have the opportunity to speak to rooms like this, which I do fairly often in my job at CIBC, to share my story as a message of resilience, as a message of hope for anyone with a disability looking to get into career. And if there's any way that I can support anyone in the audience today, you can feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, send me a message. Full disclosure, it will take me a while to get back to you. I am very busy and I get a lot of LinkedIn messages. So if you don't hear from me, don't be discouraged. I do eventually answer all my messages. It just takes me a minute. So I wanted to leave you with my final message. And my final message today is that disability positivity is not about ignoring the bad stuff that my disability brings. And there are days when my disability really annoys me, and that's okay. Being disability positive doesn't mean it's always sunshine and rainbows. But what it does mean is that my disability is more positive in my life than it is negative. And that is a really important perspective. And so I want all of you to remember that diversity doesn't always mean sunshine and rainbows, but it means that we have a lens on the world that very few people get to have. And that is a really exciting opportunity. Thank you so much for listening to me today. And please, during the Q&A, again, you can ask me absolutely anything. I've had very intimate details of my life published in the Toronto Star, so I'm not scared of any question. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We are just going to take a quick break, and then we'll jump into the Q&A if that works for you. I think we can get started. So should we draw the prize first? And then we'll jump right into the Q&As. Okay.
Yes, I think the excitement is there, and let's do that. Awesome. So before we move back into our session for today and move into questions and answer, I'm happy to share that we have the name of our lucky prize winner for today. So Fantasia Dockery, congratulations. You have won a $500 gift card. And Jessica Barr, who is at our in-person watch party, you're a lucky winner for a $100 gift card. For both of you, Allison will reach out to you within the next couple of days. So congratulations. And, spend wisely.
Thank you, Nafisa, and congratulations to our prize winners today. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so now it's time for the Q&A. I believe we have a few, quite a few questions in the Q&A for Tim. Tim, thank you again for sharing your story. I find that when folks share their own personal stories, they're a lot more relatable than just, reading a paragraph about someone's autobio, and so I think for today, in particular our audience, it's a chance for folks to think about their next steps. And I think you've guided some, or at least illuminated some options or things to consider for folks as they make their way into the workforce. And so do we want to start off maybe with one of our questions first, just to get things started, and then we'll jump to the questions from the audience? Okay, so just to get things started, Tim, what advice do you have for students with disabilities who may be struggling to see their own strengths and superpowers?
Yeah, great question, Keith. And first of all, congratulations to all the prize draw winners. I wish that I won $100 gift cards when I used to attend these events as a student. But anyway, that was a different time. So thank you so much, everyone, for asking all these great questions. And I think in terms of advice, the biggest thing that I can say is don't be discouraged, right? There were times when I was really struggling, and there were times when I didn't think it was going to happen. And you have to, and it's really hard, and it's not easy when you get a bazillion no's to believe you're going to get a yes. But you also have to remember that you do have something to offer, right? And just keep that as your North Star. Keep that as your focal point. Because if you lose that as your focal point, then it's really hard to see the light on the other side, right? So my advice would be stay resilient and surround yourself with a support network that can help you stay resilient. Whether that's friends, whether that's family, whether that is a local debate team, a local theater company, I don't care. Surround yourself with friends that can remind you how great you are. Because if I didn't have that when I was going through my career struggles, I don't know where I would be. And I want to be clear that not all of us have access to typical, family. Some of us come from difficult family situations. And so when I say family, that can be chosen family too. That can be the people in your life that love you for you. And just connect with those people, even if it's just for 30 seconds a day, because that will recharge your batteries and that will keep you going. Hope that was a sufficient enough and long enough answer.
Yes, thank you so much, Tim. I do agree that community is really important, and making those connections can really make the difference in one's journey. And so maybe we'll take a question from the Q&A.
Mm-hmm. And so, Kate, I'm happy to read out the first question. And this question comes from Jason. Fantastic. So, Jason, thank you for your question. And of course, Jason is sharing their Thank yous to you, Tim. And their question is, how does one approach sharing disability in the workplace? And also, how do I, as in Jason, as a person with ADHD, manage working with my disability in the workplace?
So, great question, Jason, and thank you so much for asking it. So what I would say is that disclosing your disability in the workplace is always a personal choice. Now, that's a choice that I didn't really have to make, because when I roll into a room, because my disability is so visible, I already disclosed just by virtue of being in the room. I'm not going to be able to hide the wheelchair. And I don't want to hide the wheelchair. I literally have it tattooed on my shoulder. So, but for some people with non-visible disabilities, that choice to disclose is your choice. And you need to remember always that no one should force you into disclosing. You have to disclose when you are ready to disclose. And the way I would do it is frame it as a positive thing. Don't frame it as, I'm so sorry, I need these accommodations, or don't apologize for your identity. None of us should ever apologize for our identities. And so frame it as a positive, but also, if you're comfortable doing so, and this goes to the second part of your question, Jason, as to how do I leverage ADHD in the workforce? Realize what strengths you have and just focus on those. Now, those strengths could be, as I mentioned earlier, as a result of your ADHD, or they could not. But just focus on your strengths. And if your disability comes up in some capacity while you're working, that's fine. And if people ask you questions, you can either answer those questions, or you can just say, I'm not comfortable answering them. And again, that is your choice. Always remember, all of this is your choice.
Thank you so much, Tim. And I must say, like, when you were going through your speech, I love that you talked about like the student community, and surrounding yourself with the chosen family and the chosen friend, because I think that leads to like empowering and really speaking towards your superpower, as you had said so much earlier. So thank you for that. I'm gonna pass it along to Gabriella, and Gabriella is gonna share with us the other questions.
Hi, team. Very nice to meet you. My name is Gabriella. I'm a Career and Student Success Advisor here at Humber College. I have a question for you. Advice for students who have never had to advocate for themselves throughout elementary and high school, and the transitioning into college and the workforce. How can one advocate for themselves in these new spaces?
So that's a great question, and thank you for sharing it, Gabriella. So I think for those that maybe have not had the advocacy experience that I grew up with, right? I talked about who my mother was and what a big influence that was on kind of my chosen career. My advice would be to start small, right? You don't have to solve everything in a day. And disability advocacy can be very tiring, even for those that do it every day. So start small, and that could be joining a local group, but it could also just be looking up articles on social media, or sharing parts of your story, sharing quotes around disability that resonate with you, right? You don't have to solve everything at once. And the other thing I would say is make sure that you are protecting your own mental health, because as I said, advocacy can be very challenging to not get discouraged when you're just fighting against barriers all day. And I've worked in this space for over a decade, and there are days when I even feel it, right? And so don't be afraid to say, I need to take time. or I need to step back for a second. That's okay. That is part of advocacy, and that is part of good advocacy. It does not have to be go, go, go all the time. So that's what I would say, and thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Tim, for the answer. I have another question for you, a little different. I too am very aware and happy with how my disability positively contributes to my life and those around me. Still, I struggle with people being critical of the celebration of my disability that I carry. Often, I'm unsure how to respond. I end up being quite avoidant of people who dismiss me. This leads to a workplace conflict. Have you ever experienced something like this? And if you did, do you have any thoughts how, as a disabled person, I can get better at working through conflicts, specifically around adversity to disability positivity?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for being so open and vulnerable and asking that question. It's not an easy question to ask. And it's not an easy question, or it's not an easy thing to kind of say, this is something that I need to get better at. And I have absolutely had situations where my own view on my disability has led to conflict. And what I would say is you have to stay committed to your own view. You are the expert in you. I am the expert in me. So what I mean by that is that we don't have to believe other people's perceptions of disability and difference. We only have to believe our own. So if you encounter conflict, find common ground. That common ground could be telling a joke just to lighten the mood, not to say that any kind of discrimination or anything like that is a laughing matter, but sometimes you just need to connect with that other person, and humor can be a great way to do that. But also, again, going back to my previous answer, start small. Maybe it's just a hello, and then you back out. Or maybe you say, I'm going to go to one career networking event in this month, and that's all I can do. And that's okay too. You don't have to solve everything. And so just see how you feel in those conflict situations and what you can do to make yourself feel empowered to say, no, this is actually how I feel. For me, that empowerment comes in the form of a tattoo that I wear proudly on my shoulder. Unfortunately, you can't see it because I'm wearing a suit jacket, but I had the wheelchair parking logo tattooed on my arm. And I did that when I was 23 years old as a mark of how much my disability meant to me, but also that I was taking ownership of my identity. And I was taking ownership of that difference. And that really helped me kind of crystallize my views on my disability. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Tim. Roxanne is asking, it appears that people with a physical disability seem to be more accepted by society versus those with a mental disability. What is your view on this? I believe the society is not educated enough to understand limitations that are not visible. Can we change that?
So that's a great question, Roxanne. And I want to, again, thank you so much for asking it and for being vulnerable, because I'm going to tell you, you're absolutely right. 70% of disabilities in this world are non-visible. So those of you out there in the audience with non-visible disabilities way outnumber those of us with physical disabilities. And I'm not, again, I don't know the makeup of this exact audience. That might be flipped on its head. But generally, you outnumber us. And you're absolutely right. Physical disabilities are more accepted in a lot of ways. And that I think that's because they are more understood. It's easy to see how a wheelchair helps me. It's not easy to see necessarily how non-visible disabilities can help someone, right? And I think what we need to do, and I'm talking about all of us, corporations, colleges, universities, community organizations, need to create spaces where it's clear that it's okay to talk about non-visible disabilities. And it's okay to share the challenges that non-visible disabilities present. And that could be as simple as putting up a sticker on a wall or a poster that make it clear that this is a safe space. We need to continue to create safe spaces where non-visible disabilities become just as accepted as the visible ones. And I completely agree with you. And some even say that there's a bit of a hierarchy, right? That those of us with physical disabilities are somehow different or better than those with non-visible disabilities. And I will tell you right now, that is ridiculous. And I don't believe that. A lot of my amazing friends in the disability community have non-visible disabilities.
Thank you, Tim. We're gonna ask, we think we have time for a few more questions. The next one is more about the education system, because a lot of the audience members today are students, who are current students. So how can the education system better prepare students with disabilities for the transition from academia to the workforce, ensuring they enter the job market with confidence?
So that's a great question. And I could spend 2 hours talking about this question. And I saw another question in the Q&A about the AODA and
Yes.
the limitations of that legislation. And I'm going to take those two together, if you don't mind, because I think they are related. So the education system has a history of leaving students with disabilities behind. And there's something that I talk about a lot called the pediatric cliff, which is this idea that everyone wants to support cute kids with disabilities. I used to be a cute kid with disability, and you see organizations like the Easter Shields and other organizations like that that support children with disabilities. And I'm not saying that those organizations aren't important. They very much are. And they serve an important role, and they served an important role in my life. But when you turn 18, a lot of the supports go away. And you end up falling off what I call the pediatric cliff, which is this idea that when you age into adulthood as someone with a disability, you lose a lot of your supports. And so what can we do about that? I think the education system needs to do a better job of recognizing that. And through that, we can do a better job of supporting career transitions once you get to the age of whatever it is, 22, 23, right? We need to make sure that the first transition point from high school into college and university sets you up for success, so that your second transition point from college or university into the workforce is just as smooth. And legislation is a big part of that. And the AODA has a lot of problems. And I'll be honest, I work with the AODA every day at my job. I am the AODA lead for CIBC. So I'm very, very familiar with this legislation. And there's a lot of issues with not actually removing barriers in the legislation, right? And one of the big problems as I'm sure many of our audience members know, is that the rules in the area are very hard to enforce, and they don't get enforced strongly enough. And so what can we do is we can make sure that those employment supports that exist actually talk in real terms about what you need, right? And it's really important. Your disability is not something to be accommodated. And by that, I mean you don't deserve accommodate. By that, I don't mean, sorry, that was almost a really bad Freudian slip. By that, I don't mean you don't deserve those accommodations. But what I mean is celebrate, don't accommodate. You are an asset. You're an asset in every space you're in because of the viewpoint you have. So just recognize that. And the education system needs to do a better job of promoting that. I should not have had to go through kind of figuring out that on my own. And I wish I had someone to tell me, like, you are an asset, go out and do it, right? And that's the message that I think we need to put out there. And also training on practical advocacy skills, right? How do you write a formal letter? How do you start a campaign? These are all things that we all, whether you end up going into advocacy or not, are useful transferable skills in every work environment.
Thank you, Tim. That was really well explained. And I do agree with that point about advocacy. I think it's an important skill to develop and have, whether it's for yourself or advocating for others. It's something that I think that most folks will encounter at some point in their own careers or in their own personal lives. So thank you for highlighting that in your response.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Keith. And Tim, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your lived experiences with us. And I think what my takeaway are some very tangible strategies to talk about. Now, my final question for you: what role can technology play in empowering individuals with disabilities in their professional lives? And are there specific tools or resources you can recommend for learners and recent grads?
So great question. And I think we've all learned way too much about technology since the COVID-19 pandemic started. We've all learned how to take ourselves off mute, even though I sometimes forget how to do that. But I think technology is a great equalizer for people with disabilities, right? There's so many examples, and I'll just mention a few things like screen readers, things like wheelchairs, right? That is a piece of technology that I rely on every single day of my life. And so technology is an incredible enabler, and I think there's lots of amazing tools and platforms and portals that we are all interacting with every day. Right, we're on one right now here on Microsoft Teams, and this allows me to get my message out farther than it would have gone otherwise. Otherwise, I would just be hanging out with you guys in a watch party, and I don't want to say I don't want to be hanging out at that watch party, but this allows us to expand the audience. But I want to add in a bit of a word of caution here as well, is that technology without advocacy is dangerous. Technology without realizing that we still need human connection, and we still need to network, and we still need to be present in our own bodies, in our own spaces, and we can't just be staring at a screen all day. And I say that as someone that stares at a screen 8 hours a day. And I will share with you that at the end of my workday, I purposely have to look away for at least half an hour. And I have to just unplug, even if it's just for half an hour, for my own sanity, right? So technology is an incredible platform, and there's lots of great examples of career sites, but also online supports, and I know that Humber and Guelph Humber have some amazing online resources that are articulated in the slide deck, and I've seen some links put in the chat. Use those resources, right? Those are so critical and important for all of us, but don't forget about the human piece. And that it's really easy, especially since the pandemic, to just all sit at home staring at a screen all day. And I go into the office one day a week just because I need to talk to other humans. And just because I want to be in a room with other people. And I'll say that, like, I'm not as productive on those days, and that's okay, because I'm talking and I'm refilling my cup with human interaction. And that is incredibly important. So that was a very long-winded answer, Nafisa, and I'm sorry. But I don't want to be like the doom and gloom technology guy, because it is really important. So I don't want to bash it entirely, but I'm just saying, don't forget about the human connection.
And thank you so much, Tim, again, to just spend the time and sort of, flesh that question out. I absolutely love that. Just filling your cup. And, I love being in the office with my colleagues. Like you said, there's so much joy and drive. And yes, we may not get a lot accomplished on that day, but that connection and that community is so valuable, especially after COVID.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just add really quickly that, like, I'm very open with my bosses that I'm not going to be overly productive on those days. I know I know that, like, if I have to get stuff done, I should probably stay home and get stuff done. But I also know how great it is to be able to sit in a room with colleagues and write things on a whiteboard or strategize or put Post-it notes up, whatever it is. Right? Those are things that it's so much easier to do in person. And technology can help us get there, and it's a really important tool, but it's not the only tool. And it's really easy to forget that it's not, or it's really easy to forget that it's not the only tool.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Tim, thank you so much again for sharing all your experiences with us. And, those of you that asked questions at the watch party in the chat, we appreciate your questions and sharing a bit about your life and your experiences with us. It's a privilege for us to learn a little bit about everyone here.